On the 22nd of October 2022, history was made in Italy as the first ever female Prime Minister in Italy was sworn in. The entire Italy was in a festive mood, not necessarily because they voted in their first female Prime Minister, but because of the promises she made. She seemed like the messiah they had been waiting for. Now, it's been a year since she has been sworn in. What exactly has she achieved? Join us as we discuss Italy's Prime Minister's first year in power, the expectation versus the reality. Let's get right into it. In September 2022, a snap election was held in Italy to determine who would be the new members of the cabinet. After suffering under the rule of the former Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, Italians decided to try something new and different. They wanted a person who had a different outlook on life than the former leaders, and that led to them voting for their first female Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Meloni was the leader of the far-right party called Brothers of Italy, and despite their extremely conservative views, they won more than 25% of the vote because of the future they promised. Just about a month later, she and her 24 ministers were sworn in a ceremony where they pledged to act in the exclusive interests of the nation. Nobody thought they were going to do otherwise because Giorgia and her team hit the ground running. Her first 100 days in office were considered a success. During her campaign, her major promises were to block migrant ships and support traditional family values and anti-LGBTQ themes. And one of the first things she did was to prove she was nowhere near as far-right as some had feared. Then she quickly created ties with world leaders, mostly due to her promise to stop the boats. In fact, she was able to put the other leaders of the coalition government in check. A good example was how she sparred with Salvini over how to deal with the energy crisis. Then she satisfied her fellow right-wingers by fulfilling her LGBTQ-related promises. We'll go further into details about this later in the video. However, after the initial rush of the first days, things took a huge turn. Now, a year has passed and things have not been going as planned. So where exactly does Giorgia and her cabinet stand in the big change she promised? Is she all talk and no action? When she and her cabinet were sworn in, there were several rumors of them intending to turn their backs against the US by supporting Russia. This rumor stemmed from the fact that Matteo Salvini and Silvio Berlusconi, the other leaders that made up the coalition government, had great ties with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. But the Prime Minister soon debunked the claims, saying it was ridiculous to assume she was going to make such a drastic move. There were also rumors of the government planning to leave the European Union, but that was so far-fetched it didn't need to be properly debunked. And many breathed a sigh of relief when those claims turned out to be false. However, they looked forward to the fulfillment of the promises Meloni made during her campaign, but the sad reality is that, as of now, barely anything has been achieved. In fact, many of the initial plans got shelved so fast that Italians are weary of what is to come. So, let's give a breakdown of some of the promises she made and where it currently stands. One of the electoral promises Meloni made was to defend the country's frontiers by creating a naval blockade off the coast of North America to prevent the entry of immigrants. This was due to the alarming numbers of boats carrying would-be immigrants entering the country yearly. As it is now, nothing substantial has been done. Initially, she had made moves to fulfill her promise of creating a naval blockade, but due to the legalities surrounding it, which is that a naval blockade can only be created unilaterally by a state in cases of legitimate defense, when a war or an act of aggression from another country is involved, she had to look at other options. She reached out to the EU and a deal was arranged where the organization would pay Tunisia to tighten its border to prevent departures in the first place. But now, that deal has fallen through as the North African government has accused the EU of breaching the Migration Pact. And to prove their displeasure, they've returned the funding the EU sent. So things have gone from bad to worse for Italy, as reports show that the immigration levels have tripled since 2021. and more than 140,000 migrants have been registered by the country's interior minister in mid-October this year, a very high number compared to the 70,000 registered in the same period last year. That's a failure for Meloni. Another promise she made during her campaign was to change Italy's constitution for the direct election of the country's president. It's common knowledge that there's political instability in Italy due to the restriction on the power of the president. And this was what Meloni promised to change as soon as she got into power. She said she'd make Italian politics look more like that of the French by correcting some policies in the constitution. Well, that hasn't gone so well. In the constitutional reform suggested by the Prime Minister, the President would be elected directly and would hold more power compared to now that they are mere symbolic figures. Although this sounds good, it has been strongly opposed by members of the cabinet due to fears of one person holding too much power. This fear might have stemmed from the way Silvio Berlusconi ruled while he was in power. Despite not holding as much power as a regular president does, this former prime minister could hardly be restrained. Although this could also be considered a failure, many people are not bothered by it as much as this next failed promise. But before we go into that, we would really appreciate if you could hit that like button below and subscribe to our channel. It takes only a second. Now, back to the discussion. Before Meloni was voted in, the people were made to believe that the pension system introduced in 2011 would be reversed to allow early retirement. But a recent announcement made by the finance minister, Giancarlo Giorgetti, shows that nothing of that sort would be happening. On the contrary, he has warned that with the total expenditure predicted to rise by almost 8% in 2023, they would have to enforce strict controls on public spending instead. Indeed, the predictions are scary, as Rome's debt is targeted to hit 140.2% of gross domestic product this year, which is the highest in the Eurozone after Greece. And this means strict measures have to be taken. But a promise is a promise, and all that ought to have been considered before the promise was made. However, Meloni's first year has not been filled with just failures. There have been a few wins too. The female Prime Minister promised to try to boost Italian pride and defend the concept of "Made in Italy", and so far she has done a good job of it. Earlier this year, the government announced that they would punish the use of English and foreign words in official communications with fines as high as €100,000. This is in a bid to boost the use of the Italian language. Although it wasn't a necessarily applauded move, it was a win nonetheless. Besides that, she has also begun working on her plan to support Italian families and to increase Italy's birth rate. The government has begun introducing checks for families with children. In the recent budgetary plan, the government allocated €1 billion to projects supporting new births in Italy. Other measures include fringe benefits of up to €2,000 for families with children, a check for families having a third child, 1 extra month of parental leave with a 60% salary, and tax deductions for companies hiring new mothers. Wonderful, right? But her stance against less traditional types of families has earned her reproach from the liberals in the country. For one, surrogacy has been made illegal for Italians both in and out of the country, and a law has been passed to prevent queer parents from appearing on their children's birth certificate, saying that only the biological parent can appear on the certificate. With this downside to the family-related laws, many find it hard to appreciate the little good that has been achieved. Besides that, many find it hard to appreciate her overall performance because the failures are more than the wins. However, it's been only a year since she got into power, so people can remain optimistic, right? What do you think? Let's know in the comments section. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.